Good morning, folks. This is Tuesday, October 3rd, 2023. This is the Podman community meeting. In this meeting, we generally discuss demos and upcoming new items that are inside the project that we want to show off, or people want to show off, or other projects that are dealing with Podman that want to show off their work as well. So if you have topics, love to have them anytime in the future. For today, we're going to be talking about, oh, no, that's not the agenda. This is a meeting that goes on every first Tuesday of the month. We also have a Cabal meeting, which had been going on the third Tuesday of the month. It will go on the third Tuesday this month, but going forward, we're moving that to the third Tuesday of the month as well. So we'll be on, the first Tuesday will be the community meeting, the third Tuesday will be the Cabal meeting, and that'll be starting in November for that one. And then topics are driven by prior meetings, or if you send requests to me, love to have topics at any point in time, and we are willing to accept discussions on Podman, Scopio, or any related container projects. If you're using any of those in part of your project, we'd love to have that as well. I have meeting notes today that I'll be taking. I've got a link there. I'll add it in Google Chat in a moment here. If you want to go ahead and correct anything I put in or add anything, and the presenters, if you have links in particular that you'd like to add, I'd love to have those added there. And then for today's meeting, we are having a demo on modules and an intro from Valentin, and we'll have a discussion about specifying guest OS and Podman machine init from Brent. And then Dan will be following up with a Quadlet demo. And then for the last 10 or 15 minutes, we'll have open topics for anybody that has a topic that they want to talk about. Before we get too far, we have to have a note from our sponsor. If you haven't seen it yet, Podman in Action book by Dan Waltz, excellent resource. And Dan doesn't like carrying this, but if you have a Red Hat subscription, you can get it for free online. And with that, I'm going to hand over this meeting to Valentin to start us off.
All right, thanks. Sorry, I had to click through the sharing before I unmuted. Okay, apologies in advance. I got to run in around 20 minutes, so I won't be able to make it through the entire call. So thanks, Tom, for moving me first. So I want to talk about something that we call containers conf modules. This is a feature that made it in the just recently released Podman 4.7.0. And I think it's best explained with a motivating example. Use cases can be quite complex, and there are loads of command line options and flags that you may need to use to run your certain workload. In this case here, I have an example where the workload, it's just an exemplary one, needs a lot of capabilities. There are certainly more elegant solutions to do that. I'm going to show them in a minute. But it boils down to, well, some use cases need a lot of massaging. One motivating example or use case is, for instance, running or accessing graphics cards inside containers, which is very common in HPC use cases, where the users even need to mount certain or want to mount certain NVIDIA libraries from the host into their containers because they don't want to ship all their container images with all these huge libraries to keep the images as small as possible. So it boils down to the command line interface can be very complex. So if you want to run your containers on a number of nodes, either you got to find a way to inject these commands, generate these commands, use config files, or users need to be incredibly smart, like typing a lot, and make sure that there's no typo. So in this case here, we have just a simple container using a lot of capabilities. One thing that we have in the Podman space is a configuration file, which is called containers.conf. So if you go into the man pages of containers.conf, you see a lot of options that you can find there. And most of these options replace certain command line flags. So in this case, I'm using containers.conf to replace all the capabilities that we have before. And here we see one environment variable. Here I'm using printenv just to print all the environment variables inside the container. You see that it has been injected here from the host. How did I do that? I did it like that. So the environment variable has been injected here via the environment string array, and all the capabilities have been injected via the array on top. So this works just fine. So you can use a containers.conf file already today to set certain defaults if you want for the workloads that you want. You can do that per user. You can do that system-wide, either user share if you want to ship it via, for instance, RPM package, or on etsy if you're a sysadmin and want to configure it for your user base. But it's always a default setting. It sets the baseline. There has until 4.7 not been a way to opt in certain configuration files, enable them selectively other than specifying them via an environment variable, as I just did on the command line flag. But use cases can be more complex than that. Maybe you need more than one configuration file. Maybe you want to separate them. All security-related config options you want to put in security.conf. All NVIDIA-related options you want to put into NVIDIA.conf. And at some point, you maybe want to compose them and use them all at once, but selectively. So this is the use case that modules solve. So instead of specifying these environment or these config files over the environment, now there is a new root flag in Podman -- module where you can specify either an absolute path. If you specify an absolute path, then the file behind this absolute path will be loaded. And if you specify a relative path, then the path, this relative path, will be resolved to certain directories on the host. So to elaborate more on that, here, if I move from my temp directory, the module into my home directory, can do this rootless if I want to, in .config containers.conf.modules. If I place it there and then use it after, I can totally do that. So in this case, if I run it here, we can see that the module is being resolved because first, we don't get an error. And second, we get exactly the environment flag that we've seen before. So I do not have an NVIDIA card, so I unfortunately cannot show a cool HPC, for instance, workload using the new modules flag on my small workstation here. But I hope I got the message and the idea across. So it's these new containers.conf modules allow for enabling certain configurations. And I believe it's a huge improvement over in terms of user experience, because you do not need to use and recall all these hundreds or dozens of, depending on the command line flags. You can ship these containers.conf files if you want to for all users. So if, for instance, the capabilities conf would not be in my home directory, but for instance in user share or etsy containers.conf.modules, then it would be found there as well. So it's a pretty simple yet powerful means to ship these settings, these defaults for your certain use cases, load them on demand. And I think that's it. So I'm open to questions.
I actually had a quick, is there any restrictions to the naming of the file or files?
They need to end with .conf. This is pretty much the convention that we had before for containers.conf files. One thing I should elaborate on probably as well is that these containers.conf files will be loaded in the specified order. So if you have module 1, module 2, module 3, first 1 will be loaded, 2 will be loaded, 3 will be loaded. So one thing that is probably worth mentioning as well is that during this loading sequence, if a configuration file, let's say configuration 2 would set the environment array, then previous settings will be overridden. So at the moment, we're looking into, and we have a proof of concept open at the moment against the Containers Common GitHub project upstream, where all the code for Containers Conf lives, that allows for appending to these things. This is not something that TOML natively supports, so we use TOML behind, it's a markup language behind Containers Conf. So we're working on improving the usability for these things. And I should probably call out the people who raised their hand. I see Chris.
Yeah, just quickly. This is seems like this could get really complicated quickly with lots of modules, and the order is significant and whatnot. Is there a reasonably easy way to see what is loaded from where, like in the debug output, for example? Like,
yeah, you will see in the debug output which configs are loaded from where. But I agree. First, people probably shouldn't take this to an extreme and ship, dozens of configs with foobar. But looking at the state of the art today, if you have these very complex, you want to use NVIDIA graphic cards in your containers, what you got to do is either use and ship huge images and use a lot of command line flags, or normally sized images and still use a lot of command line flags. So in the future, there could be a future where you would install an RPM package, which installs, for instance, Podman -NVIDIA module or something like that, and it would just install a containers conf module in user share. And then if you're a user, you type Podman -module nvidia.conf and everything's done. You don't have to care or worry about this anymore. Or if you have some security sensitive systems, you may use very strong defaults, but certain containers may still need to add certain capabilities or play a little bit with SE Linux. Then it's probably, or I would consider best practice, to ship a containers conf module which sets the base minimum of capabilities needed to run certain workloads, rather than forcing or pushing users into using the privileged flag, for instance. Yeah, as Dan says, the Papa Bear conf. Martin has another question.
Yeah, this looks pretty cool. It looks like on current main the module option is not yet supported in Quadlets. Is it going to be, or do we have to pass that through with Podman arts, like going forward?
That's a very, very good question. Yes, you're right. At the moment, Quadlet doesn't support. There's no Quadlet native containers conf field. So if you want to use it, you got to use the Podman arcs cheat sheet somehow. But it's actually a great request. Would you mind opening an issue on GitHub so we won't forget about it?
I will happily do that.
Awesome. Cheers.
Thank you.
Another question from Igor.
Continuing Martin's comment, just a question, because I saw that in the command line that you ran there, the argument was passed before the run command. Does it matter where that that parameter is, or can it? I'm just preparing myself to the Quadlet.
Yes, Quadlet. That's a very, very good question, Igor. Yes, the module flag needs to be specified before a command. So when you look in the terminal, it needs to look like this.
Yeah, and it can't look the other way.
And not like this.
Yeah.
So I can give it 20 seconds explanation of that. To initialize, right?
We have a request if you could just recall your history so they could see the original command. Do you have your history still?
No, I ran a a shell script for
Okay.
the demo, but I can quickly jump through it. So what you saw here is the module flag needs to be specified before any Podman command or subcommand. It has a technical reason, which boils down to how the Go library that we use for CLI flag parsing works, and the fact that these containers conf file are being used to set the defaults for these flags. So we gotta manually parse the module flag very, very early on initialization of the Podman binary, very early on, or right after the Go runtime has been initialized, to inject all these values. So yeah, looking forward to see this in Quadlet.
Thanks.
Yeah, great comment also from Dan. For those listening in, probably not reading or being able to read the chat, these modules work for any command. So this is not limited to running a container. Running a container is just a very compelling example, but containers conf allows for changing all kinds of fields and knobs in Podman. So even when pulling an image, there are flags and fields in containers conf that influence that, or when creating networks, volumes, all kinds of things.
Righty, I'm hearing the questions slow down here, and I know that Valentin's got to make his way out of here pretty soon. So last chance, any further questions?
Thanks for the great questions, and thanks everybody for joining.
All right, and Valentin,
Back to you, Tom.
Thanks for coming in today and talking about that. So now next we have Brent up leading a discussion on specifying a guest OS and Podman machine init.
Why don't we start with we'll start with David's demo, but to set the stage perhaps a little bit. David, I believe you were the author of the PR, were you not?
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's David has created a PR that opens up Podman machine init to do be able to load alternate OSs. I think there's really, as we've debated this for weeks now, internally, I believe it kind of boils down to two things. One is his PR opens up the ability to be able to do FreeBSD as a machine, and the other is that it opens up to be able to do whatever you want as a machine. So with that, I think it's good that we look at what his PR does, and then we can talk about what that might mean. David, we're getting a blank screen.
And no sound from David, who was on prior. I'm wondering if he's got chewed up by Google Meet, which sometimes takes people away. It's back, and David, are you back now?
You're on mute, David.
Every time I try and share a window,
Oh, you're very low volume.
I provided the PR that we're talking about in the chat for folks if anyone wants to familiarize themselves with it. I think our team has debated it quite a bit, so we're quite familiar with it.
David, is third time the charm?
Yes, it looks like it.
Woohoo!
David, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
Sorry, restarting the web browser remuted me. Okay, so can people see a terminal window now?
Yes.
So yeah, I'm sorry, the Google Meet thing kept crashing, so I'm not sure quite what was said in the intro, but my starting point here has been building on top of Doug Rabson's work to get Podman working on FreeBSD. Most of what I've done has actually been on the FreeBSD side. I just had some very small patches to Podman to make all of this work. But what you can see, hopefully, here is a terminal on M2 MacBook. And the thing that I've added is the ability to specify what the machine OS is so that you can then key different behaviors off that. And there are a few places where currently Podman hard codes some assumptions about specific target machines. So if we start this saying, here is a FreeBSD disk image, let's boot up Podman machine for managing containers. This takes about 20 seconds. Last time I ran it, maybe a bit more with Google Meet eating all the CPU. This does more or less the same things that it does today with the Linux version. It mounts volumes from the host, provisions SSH keys and everything. I did specify ---- rootful, but it doesn't actually propagate that setting, and that's on my list of things to investigate. So I need to explicitly say pass this as the root thing. But now from the Mac, all the Podman remote stuff works. So I can grab a FreeBSD container image. I can run something in that tells me what the version is. The kernel version is FreeBSD 15 current. The container is from an older version. Bind mounts from the host are working, so that's mounting the current directory in /mnt, and that shows the same things that we see on the host. And for a little bit of extra fun, the FreeBSD guest image also has the Linux compat layer working. So I can also run the Linux command to look inside a Linux image. And if you run uname, you see that this is not actually a Linux kernel, it's a FreeBSD kernel pretending to be a Linux kernel. So this is kind of where I wanted to be. I wanted to be able to build, use FreeBSD containers on the Mac that I can then deploy to servers that are running a FreeBSD OS on the host. That seemed like it was 100% in scope for what Podman machine was supposed to do. It's for supporting running containers of one OS when the host is something different. So I was kind of surprised by how much negativity there was in the PR. But a couple of people suggested discussing it in this forum. So yes, this is ARM because I'm on a Apple Silicon Mac. Most of this stuff should work on x86, but my x86 Mac is too old for me to be able to build Podman on it. The Go compiler crashes, so I haven't been able to test it on x86.
Okay.
So Paul is not here, right? So Paul was the
No.
one that pushed back the hardest.
I think we can speak for Paul. The team was pretty unified in their thinking. So I'll try to represent the team the best I can, David. And what I would like to do is just have a friendly conversation. And, well, please don't take anything as negative. So your demo was very nice there. It just established a couple of facts. Podman machine init is not an automatic thing with FreeBSD yet, is it?
You currently have to provide it the image. It doesn't go and fetch it automatically. You know,
And has that image been customized?
there's some build scripts that make that look as much like what you expect from a Linux guest as possible. As I said, what I was trying to do with most of this work is minimize the disruption in Podman. You know, it's taking the ignition file, it's extracting the bits from that it needs. It's not adding anything custom. My goal is to have the FreeBSD release engineering team able to produce VM images that are the shape Podman expects to be able to consume. I think Ed Mast from the FreeBSD Foundation is on the call, so he can maybe speak more to that. But the goal for most of this work, and this is why the Podman changes are a couple of hundred lines, the FreeBSD changes are significantly larger than that. Has always been to make sure that we're not making undue requests from Podman. We're not saying, please change how you do sharing, how you provision SSH keys. We're just saying, please don't make or provide a hook that lets us not use Linux specific mount commands, but export those with the FreeBSD ones. And I think the total changes I have are really, about 100 lines of code. And a big chunk of that is moving stuff from one function to another.
Okay, so when you were, to clarify, when you were talking about dealing with the FreeBSD disk images, your intent is to have a fully, have an image that is not configured and would use ignition?
Yeah.
Okay. How far away do you think you are from something like that?
Sorry, so I mean that's what we have now.
You do.
That image I build with Poudriere, which is the thing that the FreeBSD project uses for building packages and can build disk images. That's pre-configured to look for the ignition file in the QEMU firmware config exported space, extract SSH keys from that, add users based on that. It has the 9PFS stuff built in, so it can grab the host shares from that.
Okay.
It installs Podman from the packages. It has all the services set up to run all of those bits. And that's now scripted as a thing that just spits out a disk image that can be consumed by Podman now. That's not where I want to end up. I'd like that to be something that the FreeBSD release engineering team is producing for every security advisory, for every errata notice, as they do with other customized disk images for cloud providers and so on.
Just a quick note for David and Brendan as well. Did you see the note from Ed Must? I'm hoping I'm pronouncing his name correctly, his last name anyway. He doesn't have a working mic and want to make a note that the foundation is quite interested in this topic and is willing to dedicate resources to support what might be needed from the FreeBSD image. I can't speak English today either. Build side, and I'm looking at some production uses of FreeBSD containerization in general. I think Ed works with you, David. Is that true? Or in FreeBSD?
Yeah, so Ed is on the board of the FreeBSD Foundation and manages their technical activities.
So, I mean, personally, I think it would be okay for us to add FreeBSD support. I think the biggest pushback has been against making Podman machine end up being, the next QEMU or some way of downloading any random Unix box and running it. And the main problem we have with that is that we end up being the support people for, I pulled down my machine for Ubuntu and it's not working properly. And we don't have anything to do with that. So if FreeBSD people are willing to support this, I think it's something that, we should definitely consider. Again, we can't support it. So we need Doug and we need you, David, and anybody else from FreeBSD to be able to support this. Go, Doug.
Hey, yeah, I'm absolutely there to support this feature. And in fact, it's kind of interesting. The word support means different things in different contexts. Like when I read the 4.7 release notes, it includes a line for, adding support for dash device on FreeBSD. That absolutely doesn't mean that I expect Red Hat to support commercial customers using that feature. But it's nice that the Podman binary supports it. So I think we can have a sliding scale, sort of context-dependent support model. In this case, David and I really care about having Podman work as well as it can on FreeBSD, and being able to use that on a Mac just opens up people to experiment with it. I have a Mac on my desk at home when I'm working, so it would be useful for me. So, but it doesn't mean that I expect you to field support calls for that feature.
Yeah, I don't want to. First of all, Red Hat support, and just because we work, a bunch of us work for Red Hat. Red Hat support's totally different thing. What we're talking about here is upstream support,
Sure.
And in that case, everything you just said actually, is true as well. Our fear is that, Doug, you've been a great partner for us, so it's not, you're not in this category, but we get a lot of drive-by commits that are gonna just, here's my favorite Linux distribution. I need a machine for it. So here's how to do an Alpine machine. And then that person disappears. And all of a sudden we're getting, GitHub issues on it. And we're closing it. And people are like, well, Podman sucks. It doesn't support Alpine, right? Or, things like that. So that's really what that's probably the biggest pushback, or at least my biggest pushback.
We really designed machine purposely like an appliance, such that we could have this conversation of, you don't get to just put whatever you want in there and have us figure it out. So that was a defensive maneuver, at least when I wrote the code, the original code. I too, and I think the team as well, with some asterisks, feels pretty good about the FreeBSD machine part. So the hang up is on the other part. On the BSD machine, if you will, I think our wish would be that you make it, if you follow the code paths, there's something called a provider in our code. We'd like to see FreeBSD be a provider, even though it's using QEMU, if that's something we can maybe figure out. And I need to go back and look at the code to see if that's possible, or we just sort of tuck it, under there as OS, everything underscore Unix or whatever.
Yeah, so I mean the current delta between Linux and FreeBSD in QEMU is two things, one of which I'd like to not need. For some reason on AArch64, FreeBSD is not correctly handling the ACPI shutdown event. There's a bug filed about that upstream. Maybe Ed can help devote some resources to fixing that, but that means we just SSH in and do a shutdown -p now, as well as sending that event. That's like 3 lines of code, two of those are the open brace and closed brace for the, if it's FreeBSD, have this hacky workaround. The other one is when we mount the host file systems, the FreeBSD and the Linux mount commands take slightly different arguments.
Sure.
So I've factored that out into a separate function for the Linux and the FreeBSD one.
Perfect.
Everything else is shared across the QEMU one. I haven't tried the Apple HV code paths yet. I'm not sure how mature they are, if they're in a working state, but I'd love to work on that. I know some customers that would be very happy to have no requirement to run GPL code to be able to run containers on a Mac. I don't have quite that hang up, so I'm happy to work with the QEMU version.
Well, I wrote the Apple HV stuff, so it's perfect, obviously. It does work. The biggest hang up with the Apple HV right now is just simply that we don't have Fedora CoreOS image being generated by Fedora CoreOS. So otherwise, it's been pretty bulletproof. It does use VFKit as a. I don't know if you've have you seen that?
Yeah.
Okay, and it uses GD proxy.
I actually wrote the book about the Zen internals, so I have more than a passing familiarity with how hypervisors work.
Okay, so that would be the only. I can't think of a FreeBSD problem with VFKit. I would imagine it would boot just fine. They're Red Hatters, so we can get cooperation there. And I think they even let me merge PRs. So the second small hurdle we'll have to figure out is somehow one of our biggest efforts right now as a team, as Chris can tell you, is we're trying to get machines. We have a whole slew of machine tests now, and we're trying to get that working in CI. So the first thing that might be good is to have you run your current code against the machine tests. There's a README in there. I think you'll be able to figure it out. If not, hit me on IRC or wherever else. But we don't really have a FreeBSD CI solution. Is that something you guys have?
Yeah, I mean, Cirrus CI does open source FreeBSD CI, but the bit that we actually need here is Mac CI, and we can provide FreeBSD disk images that can integrate with that.
I can speak a little bit to that. So the Cirrus FreeBSD, I believe it's using their compute services, and I'm pretty sure that's going to be running on like a VM of some sort.
Yeah.
So is that it seems like that would cause issues with trying to run like nested virt and.
I thought GCE supported nested virtualization, but I've not actually tried it.
So and I'm not sure. I'm not exactly sure what is behind the Cirrus compute stuff. It's kind of a black box. But you're right. There are I think in both GCE and in AWS, I think they've got BSD images that are available. The EC2 side is a bit more attractive because we could, in theory, run bare metal there. It's kind of expensive, but maybe that's a possibility.
Good. So let's get it. Can we get an issue upstream about implementing this? And Chris, this is the last of your.
Yeah, you can stick me on it.
Okay.
But it would be the last of your platforms to work on it, at least at this point. But David, if we can get a thumbs up that it passes the tests, if you run it local, that would be very helpful to us in terms of confidence.
Yeah, if you can drop me a link in the chat to the README that has the instructions, I can definitely spend some time on it this weekend.
Okay, that's good. I wanted to just touch base with Doug real quick, and then we're going to have to move on. If we want to come back to this at the end, we can. Doug, did you have something further to talk about here?
Yeah, I was just going to note that we have, in a very small way, we have a FreeBSD workload running in the CI. It does the native FreeBSD build as opposed to a cross build. Obviously, it's not doing nested virtual or anything like complicated. Long term, I kind of want to be able to run system tests, but I think we're quite away from that.
I'm just going to end this conversation right now, just because of time rather than of interest. And I'm going to ask Dan to step up now and give us a Quadlet demo, and then we can come back to this after that demo's done if we still want to. Dan.
Okay, so I was talking to Tom before. So Quadlet's been around for a little while, and I'm surprised we haven't done this at a community meeting. So I'm just going to talk through quickly what Quadlet is and show you a couple of examples of it for those who haven't played with it yet. So a little history lesson. I wrote a blog on Podlet back in February of this year. So Quadlet was a effort of integration of Podman and systemd. So for those of you out there that played with Podman's always had this command Podman systemd generate, which would take a running containers on your system or running pods in your system, and then would generate a systemd unit file that was sort of the best practices of the time to define how to run Podman under a systemd unit file. That a lot of people use that. Matter of fact, there's some we've sort of tried to deprecate it, and now there's some people pushing back as they use it heavily inside of production. So we have to look at it. But a engineer from Red Hat, Alex Larson, saw this and actually realized that he understood that systemd had this concept of what's called a generator, and what a generator allows you to do is actually sort of do that on the fly, or actually generate a systemd unit file, and then customize the way that the systemd unit file actually looked on a system. So if you played with systemd at all, you've probably seen a unit file that looks something like this. And usually a unit file defines the actual application and defines some stuff under services, and then usually allows you to set up relationships between different unit files. So you can do things like install and say, this service isn't going to start till after this other service starts. But there's a special section inside of this that doesn't exist in most systemd unit files. And this section can be defined, and then you run a generator to convert this section into something that looks like a systemd could actually support. So what Quadlet does is allows us to specify these special sections inside of what looks like a traditional systemd unit file. In this case, it's just a couple of lines that tell what image the container is going to run, and then just the command to execute inside the container. When you run a systemd daemon reload, that will actually cause systemd to run a generator, which is going to run Quadlet to translate that thing that looks like a systemd unit file, we call them Quadlets, into a real systemd unit file. And I think down the bottom here, it generates, this is the real systemd unit file that gets generated here. And you'll see basically that takes that command and generates it into a Podman command that'll run in your services. But this builds in all the smarts, all the intelligence that we've added to make sure that Podman runs correctly under systemd unit files. So the original one was just to do simple Quadlets, containers underneath systemd unit files. There's a second blog that was written by Yigal on this call also that looks at advanced features of Quadlet. So we don't only support .container, but we actually support .kube, which allows you to specify Kubernetes YAML file to run inside of a Quadlet. And that's going to use Podman kube play underneath the covers. And then there's additional tools, .network and .volume Quadlets that allow you to specify, to create a Podman network or create a Podman volume. And then you can intermix all of these together. And this blog here goes heavily into how to set up a real complex Kubernetes YAML file with its own networking and its own volumes, but all created by these multiple different files underneath the Kubernetes YAML files. So now I'm going to go out and show you another example. So in my home directory now, I created a, hopefully this is big enough for everybody to see. I created a Quadlet for running Android. So this is a quick Quadlet that someone has ported Android VM to be able to run inside of a container underneath Podman. And this gives you an idea of right up here, all I'm doing is I'm leaking the environment variable to tell it where to look for Wayland on my desktop. Then I'm adding a couple of, it needs KVM and a renderer and a few other commands to be able to run container. It's kind of interesting that you can actually do things like use systemd advanced concepts. I think %t takes the current XDG runtime directory and mounts it into the container. So this is this advanced stuff. But basically, all this stuff is going to get converted into a real complex Podman command to run. But it's, again, it's fairly simple to look at. And then I can just do start Android and basically standard systemd commands to actually process a Quadlet, and there you have Android running underneath Podman inside of a container on my desktop. It takes a couple of seconds to refresh. Here it comes. Well, I didn't say it was going to be necessarily real fast, but there are some stuff that we can do to improve the speed of this. But there you have Android. And this is Android Auto, so a lot of this was done for the Auto SD code. So this basically shows you that running. So now I'm going to go into quickly through some slides of some of the power that you can do with Quadlets, because Quadlets allows you to integrate systemd, setting up parts of the system, as well as setting up containers, and now you can interact between the two of them. So this is actually part of the Ribos effort, Red Hat and Vehicle Operating System, and we're looking for setting up a section of the disk to isolate processes inside of this section from the rest of the system. And so I'm just going to go through. One of the things we can do is we can name sort of the C group that we're going to associate with the entire systemd service. We can actually take, these are all systemd tools that you can use to configure your Quadlet. We can actually pin all the processes inside of this Quadlet to specific CPUs on the system. You can actually set up C groups measurements on the groups. So you can set up CPU weight. Now you can set this up in Podman as well, but it's kind of interesting that systemd has some advanced features that we can take advantage of. IO weight similar. And we're going to go down here. We can actually set things like killer. So if your process, basically if I want to make sure that my process gets killed inside of a container, I can set up outside of this service as priority wise, then you can do that. A couple other things. We can actually set stuff like whether or not systemd should restart the service automatically. And this is interesting too. Systemd has advanced features for stopping fork bombs. So task max here is actually setting, basically says the service to say that it can never have more than 50% of the maximum amount of PIDs on the system. And then we're going to jump down. And now we're in the container section. So these are commands to setting up Podman. But when I set up the PIDs limits there, what's interesting, I think I stop here a second, certain section. But these are all flags you can set. But what I was trying to get to, and I guess my presentation. So right here, PIDs limit. If I wanted a container to have more than the PIDs limit, if I wanted to control PIDs limits from a systemd point of view and not from Podman. Podman's hard coded to go to 2048 by default. It runs containers. But if I wanted to have 50% of all CPUs, then I could go into my Podman section and tell it to set the limits to -1. Now, most of these fields inside of the container section all match up somewhat to similar Podman command line options. And there is a get out of jail free cards if we didn't implement one. So there is a Podman args that you can actually specify individual Podman commands. Bottom line is you can do really advanced stuff with running Podman under the systemd. So if you're moving to services, running on nodes, edge devices, things like that, there's incredible power in this. So I'm going to end at this point and open myself up to questions, I guess.
Any questions for Dan? I saw a couple go by for Blaze in the comments talking about it. And now I've lost it. Oh, is Quadlet Kubernetes for humans? In other words, a poor man's Kubernetes.
Well, you still have to write the Kubernetes YAML files, although Podman has the ability to generate Kubernetes YAML files. So you can do Podman kube generate from existing pods or containers, and that'll generate a YAML file that you can then use in a Podman and inside of a Quadlet. And Igal is much more of an expert on this, so I'm sure he's jumping up to answer the question. So go, Igal.
All right. I'm sorry. I have a problem with my camera. Sorry for that. So yeah, so the idea is that you can define your application either directly on as a .container or as a .cube, and then use it with as a Kubernetes YAML, and then point to it with a .cube file. The idea is that then you can reuse your already existing Kubernetes deployment or daemon set or whatnot, and use it directly, and you don't need to maintain two sources of truth. So that's the idea of that. What I also wanted to add was that in addition, since my blog post was released, well, actually it hasn't been in for 4.7, so it will be part of 4.8. There'll be a new Quadlet file type, which is .image. It will allow you to define an image pull operation that will be separate from the Podman run. The initial reason I added it was that I needed a way. I wanted to create a volume based on an image, and unlike Podman run, which knows to pull the image, Podium volume create does not do so. So I needed an automated way to pull the image separately from the creation of the volume. So this allowed me to do that. Not sure if Dan mentioned that. So there's once you can see it in my blog post. Once the .network, .volume, and next .image files are not only used to define these entities, but they can also be used in the .cube or .container or next in the .volume using .image file, so that Quadlet will know to create the link between them and also to create a dependency between the service files. So let's say I have a network created by a .network file, and I point to it from a .container file, then Quadlet will know to link to that network and also to create a dependency between the service created for the .container file and the one created for the .network file.
Excellent. I think somebody's pointing out that there's multiple ways of running containers. There's Kubernetes YAML, there's Docker Compose, there's Podman systemd generate, and now we have Quadlet. I think Quadlet is biased towards systemd use cases for running containers, and we've always had a goal with Podman to make it as integrated with systemd as humanly possible. The real neat thing is that you can start to run your Kubernetes workload. So if you define your application in terms of Kubernetes, then we can run it locally under a system D as well as running inside of a Kubernetes cluster. So we can actually run the gamut of those tools. Obviously, we continue to support Compose and Kubernetes YAMLs for running container as well. So that's it. Any other questions? Have I missed anything?
I'm hearing silence, and we're getting close to the end of the hour. So I'm going to thank Dan and Yigal for talking through this and the questions that we got on it. And I will just ask if there are any questions that somebody else had. Karen.
Hi, Tom. So my question is regarding. I was trying to. I deployed my container, but I was thinking to add authentication for it. Like if any user is using Podman exec command, he can directly get inside the container. So is there a way to add any type of authentication for that?
Do you want to block? So you're running a rootless container or a rootful container?
It is a rootless container.
So you're worried about other people logged into that user getting in, or you have, or is your container listening on the network?
I'm worried about the other users, especially the root user, to access my container.
Yeah, so that if you are worried about the root user, the future of that type of worry, Podman has no way of controlling that. Matter of fact, no process on a Linux system right now has a way of controlling that. If you're following along with the thing called confidential computing, which is just starting to show up right now, and confidential computing is the way to solve that problem, but it takes specific types of hardware that are not available on laptops or low-end devices yet. But I think over the next 6 to 9 months, so this would be using encryption so that the processes inside of your container, as well as all the content, would be encrypted in such a way that the root process would not be able to interfere with it. Well, the only thing it could do is kill it, but you wouldn't be able to examine the content or manipulate it. So.
Okay, so I'm mostly concerned about my source code, which is inside the container.
Yep.
Using the Podman secret, can I hide all of my source code?
No,
And make the
secret is only to leak a secret from external to the container into the container in such a way that it would not be saved. So secrets are, it's really a secret from the image that could be created. So secrets is not what you think it is. Now you could encrypt your container and pass in a secret to decrypt your content, but that would not make it safe from the root user on the system.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you, Daniel.
Yep. Jennings has his hand raised.
Okay.
Go, Jennings.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. How much time do we have? Because I do see that it's 12.
We can go a few more minutes.
Okay.
Your question's between me and lunch, so yeah.
Yeah, so I have a really long question that's really multiple questions. First, I can share that I've been using Quadlet just on my personal home server, and I've been able to deploy Nextcloud using Quadlet. And so far, it's been running smoothly, but I do have a couple of bugs that I need to work around. One of them has to do with like Podman network create. And when I created the issue on like the Podman GitHub, they closed it as won't fix. So I'm just trying to explore other options. I've seen this word pasta appear like on the issue boards, but I've never found any documentation for it. Can anyone tell me what pasta is, and is it something that I could possibly look into?
Pasta is a replacement for the current Slurp implementation. Its claim to fame is that it's more performant. maybe you could paste the issue so that we can refamiliarize ourselves with the issue.
There we go. So that's the issue with Podman that I have. How the Nextcloud on Quadlet thing for me works is that this is a special repository called Nextcloud All-in-One. A little context on what Nextcloud is. Nextcloud is like a self-hosted Google Drive. And this Nextcloud All-in-One project works by speaking to the Docker daemon and creating some containers of its own. I found this pretty easy to do with Quadlet and also rather elegant to do because as a systemd service, the .container file can actually specify a dependency on the Podman socket. And so I'm able to just bring everything up with a systemd start or so systemctl start. But then we get to this problem where the application called Nextcloud AIO wants to speak to the Docker API, and Podman understands most of the things, but encounters a internal error with this specific issue. I wanted to create a workaround in Nextcloud AIO, but they just shot down my PR as well.
I was exploring that the other day, and I saw that there's a little blurb on their website that basically says that they don't want to support Podman because of differences with the Docker API. They don't enumerate what those differences are, which is not helpful.
What is the difference?
We don't know. It just says Nextcloud AIO does not currently support Podman due to differences with the Docker API. It's very generic like that.
Is that what you're seeing, Jennings?
The API is the same, but the behavior is different. So like you can make the proper API call, but it's not going to work because of this issue with Slurp. And I'm not sure if it's truly something like that I can't figure out or whether or not it's been closed by won't fix erroneously.
Well, Paul's not here to speak for himself, so I'm not going to speculate. He's one smart cookie.
I can say a bit on this, Brent. This is is mostly internal database stuff. It's an accounting thing where the slurpernet and SNet mode doesn't allow for a list of networks. I think it's definitely fixable, but this is like refactor stuff that will probably go along with the rewrite for Pasta. So I don't think it's fixed by Pasta, but I do think that we're actively working on this bit of code as part of the Pasta transition.
And Paul is working on that presently. So we could take a note to follow up with Paul to see if that's something he can consider. Is that what you're sort of suggesting, Matt?
Yeah, my impression of this is that it's definitely something we could incorporate into the larger rewrite, and I don't think it'd add that much effort since we're already going to have to rework so much of this code for what do you call it, Pasta.
Yeah. And he's in Germany, so he's on PTO today. There's a holiday.
It seems like it would be useful for us to get details from the Nextcloud people what exactly in the API is not matching, because there's my understanding is we want to try to have Podman be close. So if it's
to try to save you from that conversation, I'm pretty sure what they just mean is they are skeptical and it's more work for them to maintain something that is somewhat niche in their community right now. Everyone's happy just running Docker as the root user, and they make rootless Docker a special case as well. And then Podman is a special case of a special case. And they just don't have the manpower to tease out these tiny little bugs that are different between Docker and Podman. So this issue that I created on the Podman repository, it does seem like a difference or broken feature parity to me because it's very easy to reproduce. But I do see that this is also just a very rare edge case, since trying to join an existing container to a existing network isn't something that most people would do very often. Yeah. If we do have a solution for this bug down the road, like say after a Pasta rework and then after some more effort on this issue, then I would say this bug is the last thing that's kind of blocking specifically Nextcloud AIO from working with Quadlet in a very elegant way. So if this issue is ever resolved, then I would probably be able to contribute to the Nextcloud repository just the set of Quadlet files that I used to bring everything up, and it'll be a seamless experience for other people to try.
Or a blog article would be good.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, like the Nextcloud AIO maintainer invited me to write a wiki page. I haven't really. Once again, things work out of the box so long as you work around this one bug by just changing like 2 lines of source code.
Great. I think I'm going to wrap up here just due to time. Jennings, is there anything else that we can do at the moment or for you or help you with this?
Let's try to circle back. Jennings, are you on Discord or IRC or something where we can circle back to you later in the week?
I am on the Matrix channel.
Okay, great.
As Jennings. Okay. Right, sounds good. Any other last questions before we wrap up for today? Okay, I'll just throw out the reminders for upcoming meetings. We are next meeting on December 5th, on Tuesday, December 5th for the community meeting here. Our next Cabal meeting is coming up in just a few weeks. That will be on Thursday, October 19th. And that too is at 11 a.m. And as a reminder, that will be our last Thursday Cabal meeting. We'll be moving those to Tuesday as of November, and that'll be the 3rd Tuesday of the month there. And with that, I am going to thank everybody and our presenters especially and the folks that asked questions, and we're going to stop the recording here.
Tom?
Yes?
Just if I can, before you hang her up, could the FreeBSD folks and at least Matt stick around?
Sure.